that long back in my old university, uh, Devi Alia University of Indore, uh, we had an American professor uh, who had come on, who had come as an international lecturer to deliver lectures on photosynthesis, and he was to stay with us for about 6 weeks, delivering lecture on photosynthesis. He had come as a Fulbright international scholar. Then he made a proposal to us, which was very new to us at that time, to play a drama based on the topic of photosynthesis and to play it on a stage using our students. At that time, computers um, were not so much in use as it is now in use. So we made a drama on the theme based completely on scientific aspects of photosynthesis. But we included some music and dance in it to make it a more dramatic kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so it went for a stage drama on photosynthesis for 1 hour. Of course, it was quite appreciated. We had an audience of about 200 people, and for the first time. So I'm reminded of that. And I think endogenous, to work on an endogenous design, maybe Dr. Athawale will agree with me that it is necessary to work with the people who are well versed with the subjects on which these games are to be
Absolutely.
prepared. So it needs a collaboration between the computer experts and designing experts and the actual people from these academic areas. Uh, I hope Dr. Athawale will tell us more about it and inform us. We'll be better informed about how to develop these endogenous games in different subjects. With this introduction, I welcome Dr. Athawale once again. We look forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much, sir. So before starting the session, I would like to introduce our eminent speaker, Dr. Sandeep Athavale. Dr. Sandeep Athavale leads the Purposeful Gaming Games Lab at TCS Research. His work focuses on the study and application of games for teaching learning in academic, corporate, and societal context. He has also worked on the design of games and playful activities for enhancing user experience in the domain of healthcare. He has a PhD in educational game design from Design School, IIT Bombay in 2020. His PhD work on endogenous design brings distinctiveness in the education solution offered by the TCS. Dr. Sandeep is a chief mentor for educational game marketplace program at TCS. He is also on advisory panel of the INAE SERB Digital Games Initiative, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. He has been a visiting faculty at NID Bangalore and IDC IIT Bombay for a master's course in game design. He has been a panelist at NASCOM Game Conference and India Game Development Conference in the field of serious games. He was an advisor to professional bodies such as PMI India on games and has conducted faculty development programs through AICT and IEEE. Dr. Sandeep has several publications and a few patents in his name. He has a bachelor's degree in electronics engineering in 1992 and a master's in business administrations in 1995, both from Pune University, and has several years of experience in the IT industry prior to starting research in 2011. I once again welcome Dr. Sandeep Athavale and request him to please start the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupali ma'am. That was a very precise introduction, I would say. And I would also like to, first of all, thank Professor Dubey for inviting me for this session, and also Dr. Guru Prasad, who actually stole the surprise. I mean, he introduced endogenous design very well. In fact, the example of drama that he gave is precisely what this endogenous design is about. So we'll discuss that in a little detail. So in today's talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce uh, games and educational games a little bit. And why I'm doing that is because I'm not sure about the background of the participants joining today. I mean, they might be coming from varied backgrounds, may not have introduction formally to educational games. So I'm assuming with that assumption, I'll briefly do that introduction of educational games. And then we will look at what is endogenous design, how to do that. We'll talk about some examples. And later on, towards the end, we'll give some ideas on how everybody can do endogenous design in their own field of work and make their own learning and teaching interesting. So that's what I'm planning to do in this session, and hope to finish in given time. And we'll have questions in the end, as I know. But if anybody wants to raise a question in between, I would leave up to Professor Dubey to address, I mean, to bring it up as appropriate. And so with that, I'll put up my slides. So are my slides visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, great. So though the title of the talk, the abstract that we had shared through email was about endogenous design, the topic is really about making learning interesting. And endogenous design is a medium to achieve that. And we'll see how it, I mean, whether my claim is justified or not as we go through the presentation. And we have some shape on the slide, this set of triangles. Uh, I mean, I purposefully, I mean, I don't want to make a meaning out of it right now. We'll see, we'll unfold it as we go along. Okay. So let's start with a common ground, and I do this particular slide for every presentation I do, irrespective of the forum and the background of people attending, because there is a lot of overlap between different terms that we hear today. So especially between game and gamification. So I always believe that it's good to have clarity about what we are exactly addressing in this particular session. So there are a range of things. When we start with game, there are many definitions, and today is not the topic is not going to address about how to define games. But most of us know what is a game, though we may not agree on certain definitions. And there are some well-known or popular definition. One being carved out by Salen and Zimmerman. So their definition is most widely accepted. So game essentially is an artificial world where players voluntarily participate for amusement and challenge, and with a illusory attitude. Illusory attitude means they want to have fun from that experience. So this is what game is largely defined as. And why this definition is also important is because educational games will have to derive from this superset that is called as games. So educational games also need to be amusing, and players should voluntarily participate in educational games. Whether that happens, we'll see that. So when we look at the other definitions, let's look at the axis on the top. It runs from the one end to other end with artificial world on one side and the real world on the other side. So games are essentially artificial worlds. They have a boundary, and people voluntarily go into that boundary and play the game. So boundary mean, I mean, it doesn't mean a physical boundary like you. It's not a boundary of a cricket stadium where inside which you play a game. It's a mental boundary as well, or sometimes it can be physical, it can be logical. There's a boundary though that you enter a game space and play the game. Whereas gamification is totally different. It's on the opposite end of this axis. It's in the real world. So gamification is applying game-like elements or game-like concepts to the real world. So it's in happening in the real world. So while we make payments through Google Pay or do some shopping somewhere else, there are gamification elements embedded there, and we get some rewards for doing certain actions. So that is gamification. So that's the opposite end. But we are not talking about gamification today. So what we are going to focus is on this blue rectangle or blue box that is called applied games, also called as serious or purposeful games. So these are games but applied for a certain purpose. So that's why they move a little bit away from the entirely artificial world towards the real world, right? Because there is an element of reality attached to it, which is the purpose itself. So these are essentially games applied for a purpose. So they have to satisfy all the qualities of a game, unlike gamification. So when we talk about educational games, a lot of times our notion is I mean, we tend to think of these e-learning programs that we are typically aware of, but those are really not educational games. They are something different. Educational games have been there for ages. I mean, right from the early stages of human evolution, these games have been there, and games have traditionally been used to hone skills that are required for survival and as well as for a pastime. So some of these games, like we have this archery, then there is chess and snakes and ladders. These are all educational games, and I'm sure some of you would already appreciate that this is. I mean, you might know or might have read about this as well. And snakes and ladder is typically called a luck based game, but these are actually purposeful games with certain purposes. So this actually was really a skill based educational game, so to hone the skills and become more efficient in using the skills. Chess was a strategy game used to, I mean, this game used to hone the skills of strategists, how to basically defend the kingdom or how to attack the opponent's kingdom and so on. And then there is a game of snakes and ladder, which is actually not a truly luck-based game. Though it, I mean, it is played as a luck-based game. It is really a philosophical game, which evolved in a very early period, and it was called Moksha Patam that time. Right. So there are many different ways in which snakes and ladder is played. So the way that Moksha Patam was supposed to be played was that people used to play it and discuss what went wrong in their life, what went right, what did they do to make things right, and so on. So essentially, it is about uh, the purpose that is being made or getting educated about the philosophy of life. So these educational games have been there for ages. And the literature also says that games are a very natural vehicle or a natural medium for learning. The argument that is made is that the younger ones of mammals learn from playing games. So we always see puppies playing with each other, and it is perfectly a game. The reason is that they play by some rules and they have artificial boundaries. They will not bite each other, or it is not meant to harm each other, right? We all have observed that. So one puppy will wait for the other puppy to come and catch the whatever they have caught. Maybe it's a piece of cloth or a slipper, chappal or whatever. So they play a proper game, and what it is doing is it is helping them hone the skills for survival in their life. So it is a natural tool for learning. And one of the interesting quote that Crawford had made in his book was that you never see the young ones of mammals being lectured by their elderly. They are not taught in a school or with a board or something. They learn to play, right? So educational games are a very natural medium to learn. And they have a desirable characteristics that can make learning fun. I'm not going to go into details of this right now. We all know that. Especially the ability to take risks is something that stands out in these games, because in the real world, if you are making a real experiment, you cannot take risks or you cannot take different paths to mix two chemicals. But you could probably do that in a game, right, and see what happens, whether it burns or explodes or whatever. And the other reason that educational games should be looked at with keen interest now is the reason that younger generation is quite engaged with games today. And the reason they are engaged is the way the games are created. They have some design elements that actually engage users, right? So the users or younger audiences stick to them for hours. Whereas when it comes to learning, the attention span, the complaint is that they have very short attention span. So the kids will not stick to a particular topic for more than 10 minutes. So there is this dichotomy. And how do we then use the power of the games to make learning interesting? So that's what educational games should really be about. Okay. So, however, I mean, despite we saying that educational games are so important and so natural, what is happening today is that the kind of games we encounter today are a little different than what they should do, right? So, let's take this simple example of rocks and soil, a game on that. This topic typically comes in middle school somewhere. And I have chosen this topic deliberately because one survey that we did, this rocks and soil was rated as one of the boring topics by students. Right? So they do not find it interesting to read this topic. There are lots of facts and they do not actually become lively. Right? So what would a typical educational game do from this is create uh, visual effect like a game. You enter, provide a character which will walk you through it. But the problem is that the core content of the education or learning doesn't undergo change. So the same facts, same information is presented, a little bit in a different way. I mean, it is just presented in a visual way with the character talking and doing certain actions here and there, right? So this actually creates it actually doesn't help the kids enjoy this experience. It actually creates a um, disturbance because they are neither enjoying the learning content which they could probably, because they are not liking, they could probably rush it through in a short time. They have to go through this video for a longer time. At the same time, they do not get any experience of playing. So it creates an issue, right? So it doesn't help, it doesn't add any value. So what happens after this is that there are, the players would typically get a assessment. There would be quizzes that would run, and those quizzes could be embedded inside some games which are again unrelated. So you could have a racing car game, and there could be quizzes coming from different topics. The same racing car game could be used to ask questions for maths or geography or anything, and the racing has nothing to do with this topic. All right. So these quizzes actually really irritate. Somebody who is enjoying the car race, it would the car race would irritate a player or a learner who is actually trying to answer the quiz fast. So this is not a good way to create educational games. And what happens in the end through after this game is you get a badge saying that you have earned something and congratulations and so on. So these badges also have very little value. I mean, in the beginning, people attach value to it, but eventually, after a while, it has a diminishing return. People don't find really much value, and especially people who are lagging behind in a particular activity absolutely do not give a damn to these badges. And this is not my opinion. It's substantiated by literature. Okay? So, what is happening with educational games? They make the promise of making education fun, but are they making that? Right? So, if I open this question to the audience, I have seen it many times that when we open questions to audience or to participants on an online call, there are hardly any responses. But this is a rhetorical question. So, if I ask this thing that name any 3 educational games that you have seen, which students have voluntarily downloaded to play. I have myself not seen such thing happening. Nobody wants to download any educational game and play it unless it is mandated by the school or somebody or the parents saying that you have to finish this. Nobody will do that, right? And a joint question or a correlate to that, can we name any 3 successful educational games that are running and people are enjoying playing that? So it's very hard to do that. It's not that there are none of this kind which exist. There are few games here and there that are really good, and they are available at different places. So some universities have some interesting games, and some publications have some very nice educational games, but they are far and few. They are not commonplace, right? So why aren't they? No, before I go here, I just want to just do a checkpoint. Am I audible? And is it? Because sometimes you just keep speaking and nobody is there to listen.
No, yes, you are audible.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. So why aren't these educational games fun? Because the kind of design we discussed here is called an exogenous design, and Dr. Guru Prasad briefly mentioned about it in the beginning. So exogenous design is actually putting a layer of game on the educational content. So what is essentially happening is that the educational content and game is not intermixing. They are not integrated properly, or they do not belong to the same space. So what happens is that playing and learning stays separate. So like I showed in the example of this racing car, the playing is about racing, racing the car, but learning is about something else. It could be geography or math or anything. And they are not related to each other. So the knowledge about a certain kind of stone or rocks or its origin has nothing to do with the speed at which you will race the car. It is just that how fast you answer is what is measured. It's not the topic itself. So this is a kind of design called as exogenous design. And exogenous designs are not effective. And current educational games or e-learning content or e-learning avenues that are available 90% of them use this exogenous design, and that's why they are not sought after. And that is why people don't think of them as games. So kids will not think that it is a game. They will just think that this is also a learning content. This is work and not game, right? So that's why the educational games are not meeting the promise of making education fun. And in the literature, there is an interesting term given to it. It is called as chocolate coated broccoli. Okay, so you want people to eat broccoli because it is healthy, and because people don't like its taste, you put a chocolate coating on that. Now, this is exactly what is exogenous design. So, what is happening is that people will not enjoy the chocolate because they know that the broccoli taste is going to come immediately after that, and neither will they get the benefit of health because they will not eat it in the end, right? So, they try to avoid it. Now, again, I'm sorry, this example, some people might be liking broccoli, but that's a different case. We are talking about those who do not like broccoli itself. So those who do not like the learning content in the current form, we are talking about that audience, right? And the other problem with educational games is that it has not reached all the segments of education, right? So we will hardly see an educational game that is looking at knowledge acquisition, where some concept is getting learned or something new is getting introduced. The educational games today are not equipped to handle that. Most of the games will be about assessment. So there will be quizzes. That's what are, I mean, those are passed as games. They are not really games, they are quizzes. But that's what is the focus. And on the type of content, it is mostly focusing on facts and procedures, right? And again, so, and integration is mostly exogenous. And that's where this limited reach and the lack of endogenous design is what we are going to focus on today. So what we want really is that we want games should be played because they are fun. So students should feel that this game is fun to play. The learning is incidental, right? And I'm enjoying this game, and that's why I'm going to play it. That should be the way it should be happening. And how could that happen? Is if we create a game that is inherently fun to play, people are going to want to play, right? So how is it possible? So that's where we enter endogenous design, right? So endogenous design, by definition, is creating design from within. Okay, so that's a technical way of putting it. What it essentially means is that basically we have to find interesting elements from the topic itself. Now, do we really have to create a game? It's not essential that we create a game. If a teacher, normally good teachers do that anyway, they find out something interesting within the topic and try to bring that out for the students to enjoy that topic. So that's exactly what endogenous design is. The only thing we are doing is that we are bringing those elements out and turning them into a game, right? So essentially, the endogenous design, the crux of it is finding interesting elements from within the topic itself. Now we'll look at the three steps that are required to do that. So first step is to find interesting elements from the topic. Then we have to translate it into the game elements. So we are not creating a separate layer here like exogenous design. We are using the content elements and creating a game element from that. Okay. So if you take the analogy of the chocolate coated broccoli, we are trying to find the tasty bits from the broccoli itself and try to create a chocolate out of it. So that's really the analogy. Whether that can happen with broccoli is a different debate. Okay, and finally, what we do is that once we have this set of translated elements, we compose them into a playable, meaningful game. So these three simple steps can create a game which is interesting. Now we started with this image of triangles in the title slide. I said that we'll unfold that uh, as we go further. So these are some different equilateral triangles, an array of that. And in middle school, we'll have a topic on basic shapes in geometry, and they will get introduction to triangles and rhombuses, trapeziums, and so on. So how do we find interesting elements from this topic and create a game out of it? So this particular arrangement has many things to look at. So if we really try to dig it out, we know that each triangle has sides, each shape has sides, it has vertices. These shapes can be arranged together. Arrangements can create something more than what we see with the basic shapes, right? So here, if you see those simple triangles can be seen as arranged into trapeziums, parallelograms, rhombuses, even a hexagon, which I have not marked separately, but there are hexagons. There are equilateral triangles sitting there. right? And you could have even simple angles there. You could have an acute angle, obtuse angle, and a lot of things are, a lot of information is embedded within. Now, the idea is to pick up, identify these interesting elements, and find out what can be a game from this. So, can there be a game where we provide matchsticks to the students, and they will arrange, they will put these sticks on the side of this triangle and then create different shapes? Yes, it is possible. And I'm just telling you one possibility. There are many ways in which you can do it. So assembling things together, or or it could be hiding something. It could be trading something with somebody. So you could trade a triangle with somebody and allow the other person to create a rhombus. In turn, you get a semicircle and you try to create a circle of yourself. So a lot of interesting possibilities are there within the content itself to create interesting game. Right? So that's the second part of translating into game element. I just showed you in a very simplistic rendering that you could translate a content into a game element easily, right? So we'll try to go through these three steps again quickly with another example. We'll go back to the rocks and soil example in the geography because that was not interesting to the student. Let's try to make it interesting. So what happens here is that so endogenous design, and this is 1 hour talk, and we could only discuss the highlights of it. But it could be a 1 week course or a 1 month course, or it could be a full semester course as well, depending on how much interest or how much depth people want to go into. So it has what it means is that if it can go for a semester, it means it has a science and there is a theory. There are methods to do that, right? So I'll not go into those all the details today, but we'll keep it simple. So what essentially we have to do is in the given topic or a content, and I think this is important for all people who teach it or all students who want to learn it. And if they find something not interesting, they could try this as an experiment. So find out interesting things within the topic itself. So how do you do that? So try to find out who are the actors in this. So if it is a chapter in history, the actors are quite obvious there, right? So you have a king or you have a ruler, and then there would be armies, and there could be a lot of players, or there could be enemies. So history will offer those things obviously. But when you look at geography, you have to find the actors by putting some effort. So in this topic of rocks and soil, the actors really could be human beings who are trying to use these rocks. So they might want to build something or do something with the rocks, right? So there are actors, they may not be obvious there. And their actors will have motivation. So why do we start with actors? Is because games are played by players, which are humans. So we want the players to have some motivation in the game, that they want to achieve something, right? At the end of the game, they have to win something, capture something, gather something. So that's why that motivation is important. So in this rocks example, what could be the motivation we have to look at? So could it be that they want to possess these gemstones, which are very costly? So there could be many motivations for why people want to explore the rock. Then there are objects. The objects could be the rocks themselves, rocks of different kinds, rocks available at different places, and so on. The actions that the players can take, right? So the actions that player or the actors can take. So this action could be pick up a rock, gather rocks, throw rocks, assemble rocks. Any lot of actions are possible. Many verbs that you can attach to a rock can become an action, and so on and so forth. Again, we do not have time to go through the entire list. So this is what we have to pick up. So this is what we do in step one: find the elements of interest. Right now, there are elements which are there in the picture itself. That there is a volcano which is a source, and you are getting some fresh rocks there. Right, there is a rock available in the waterfall. So different kinds of rocks are available, and they might have different properties that you can use in the game. On the right hand side, we have some hidden um, elements that we didn't obviously find there. So actor will have some motivation. Then you could, based on the usage, you could actually say that, okay, the rocks can also become ammunition. It could also be used to build a castle and so on. So once you identify these elements, what we do is that we have to translate into a game system. Now we cannot translate this into a game system unless we know what is a game system. Now again, learning game system is a very elaborate topic. In brief, games actually, if you start from the designer side of this picture, designers typically create a game structure. Okay, they really create a structure within which a player can act. So what does a structure give? Structure can give an environment, a set of rules. Sometimes a game is just based on rules. So when we play this game called rocks and scissors, okay, nothing to do with our rocks and soil chapter, this rock paper scissors, that does not require any environment, it just has rules. Okay, so the game designer just creates a set of structure, rules, or whatever is the minimal required. And so while creating this structure, the designer also creates something called as game mechanics. So game mechanics are actions that a player can take in a game. So in a shooting game, the action that a player can do is shoot the enemy, right, using a gun. And so the player interacts with this particular mechanism. So the player interactions really include that holding a gun, pulling the trigger, and so those are the interactions which actually eventually would actually fire a bullet. So this is how the game is designed. So these elements, these resources that are used in the game are uh, they could be the bullets, they could be your own army personnel. So there are resources in the game. This brief I'm just giving right now so that we can see how these elements that we identified translate into some of these game elements. Right? Okay, so this is how we translate it. So actors get translated to characters in the game. So kings, we are going back to the example of the rocks and soil again. Okay, so actors can become characters. So they become kings or builders of these castles, or they can become warriors who will fight on the ground. Motivations would be to grow the kingdom, to defend the kingdom, to attack opponent's kingdom, and help your kingdom become more prosperous, and so on. The objects that are we identified there, like rocks and of different kind, they become resources. So some rocks can be used to build a castle, some can be used to attack the opponent, some could be treasured, like the gemstones, and they could gemstones could also be used to trade with some other kingdom, and you buy something from the other kingdom. You might want to make a treaty with the enemy saying that I'll give the treasure but don't attack me. So a lot of things can happen in a game, or in actually happens in the real world also, right? And then the actions that the actors could have taken will transfers or translate themselves into mechanics. So the actors can now build the castle, attack the opponent castle, capture enemy, or capture precious stones, trade. A lot of things can happen, right? And so on and so forth. So all these elements can actually translate into something that is meaningful inside a game. What we are essentially doing is, now step 3 is composing a game which is endogenous, which is actually completely built from the topic itself. Now when the kids play this game, we are not going to play a racing car game where the topic is totally unrelated. Here they are going to actually go to the volcanoes, go to the river beds in the game I'm talking about, pick up stones of various kinds. While they do that, they automatically know that they are whether they are picking a uh, igneous rock or a sedimentary rock, right? Because the map will tell them what is available where, and you need certain kinds of rock to build castle, you need certain kinds of rock to attack, and so on. So automatically, without asking them to go through a chapter or through a text, kids or the players will learn the essence of the topic. So this is where we compose a game saying that it's a multiplayer game where every player has a kingdom and blah blah. So that is how the game is finally created. So we have an endogenous game which is ready. And this is possible. Now the question is that, okay, I took one example, maybe it's possible to do that. Is it possible to do for other topics? Let's see from some examples quickly. Now these are two examples from physics. Okay, so for lack of time, I'll not go into each of the examples. Now let's take the right hand side game, which is on for learning the properties of light or a ray of light. Now here is a board game where each there are two play. This is a two-player game, and each player begins from one end and has to go to the other end. And while doing that, they have to carry a ray of light from their end to the opponent's end. If they do that, they win. Whoever does that first wins actually. And what the opponent has to do is that do the same thing. Take his or her ray, and get it to the other end. And they have to also block your opponent from coming to your side. Right. So the red player will want to block the blue player from coming to his side, and vice versa. Now, how do you actually promote your own ray and block the opponent's ray? You use the principles of the light and objects within the chapter itself. So use the mirrors, use the lenses, use the periscopes, use the principles like if you keep a mirror at 45 degrees, then you can take a right angle turn with the ray and so on. So you move the ray along the path to the opponent's end and block the opponent's ray, and an opponent does the same. So how intelligently use the objects can help you, objects and the principle can help the player win the game, and while doing so they can also learn the topic. So they do not have to read it again, or maybe they read it for revision, but the learning is complete after you play this game basically, because the cards that you use, the objects that you use are directly mapping to the principles or topics within the chapter. Similar things can happen for geometry and chemistry. And then what about abstract topics like math? Is it possible to create a game for things something like math? Yes, we uh, in my PhD I had done this experimentation where this endogenous design method and toolkit was given to the designers, and they were asked to create games for various topics. So some people created these interesting games. So this game on the left hand side is a balance. It's a game of maths for learning equations. So equations are really abstract, and here this particular designer created a two-way balance. Okay, two-way balance meaning there are, like we play a board game, there are four players. People sitting on the opposite side are partners. So that's the same thing. The green players are partners here, the red players are partners. Each player has got a set of weights on with them. Some weights are marked with some numbers, the actual weight, and some weights are marked with this variable X or Y or something. And in this game, what really the players have to do is to balance their own side. So green players have to balance the green, reds have to balance the red, and uh, players have to. They can also exchange weights with the opponents, and also they might pass weights that are not required to the opponent on their turn. So the rules actually define what they could do. So the point is that it is possible to create an endogenous game even to learn mathematical equations. Now we talked about this school education. Can it happen to higher education, engineering? Yes, absolutely, it can be done. Now this is a so again, I apologize that maybe all the participants today are not from the engineering domain. You might be teaching humanities or management or something else. But this example I have just picked up from electronics engineering because it is little more involved, right? So management games are relatively easier to build because management games have a lot of situations to deal with. Situations can easily translate to game plots, and actors have a lot of motivation, lots of motivations to work there. So it is easier to create a game. Electronics engineering, RLC circuit is a very specific topic, but it's absolutely possible to create an endogenous game from that. So here you create a plot where the players have to actually unlock a certain door by using the right frequencies. And that right frequency can be achieved only if you make a right circuit with right combinations of these electronic components. Again, without going into details, a lot of interesting things can be created with this. And again, this is a game. You want to make sure your team or you open the door before the opponents open it. So again, there has to mechanics where you pass on unwanted components to the opponent, and you trade and get the right thing so that you get the right combination to unlock. Professor, we have got 5 minutes or 7 minutes. How much time do we have? Dubey sir?
10 minutes.
Okay, great. So we talked about educational context so far. Now I just want to extend into non-educational or non-academic context. So does this concept of endogenous design really apply beyond that? Okay, so it does. So when we look at context beyond education, we are talking about applications such as creating awareness or problem solving or basically assessment and testing of certain abilities, right? So these are all some forms of education. So essentially the endogenous design will apply to these contexts very well. I'll just pick up one example. There are 4 different games I put out. These are existing games. These are not educational games, but these are created for some different purposes. So this Dumb Ways to Die, the first game on the left corner is, some of you might have played it sometime back. A few years back, it was very popular. It was created by this Melbourne Metro in Australia. It was created to help the users of the metro become aware of hazards, so that you should not um, jump onto the tracks, or you should mind the gap between the platform and the train, and so on. So if you don't follow it, you tend to die. So this game actually is an awareness creating game, right? So this is an endogenous game because it picks up the element from the metro station and puts it into the game, right? So by playing itself, you learn that what is a good way or what is a safe way to ride a metro. You do not need a separate manual to read. So that's the essence of the game. It has achieved what it has to achieve, right? So again, I'll not go into other examples, but you can easily go into other domains and apply this concept. And we can go really berserk and go to many different domains. And why this list is here? Because our team, our research lab in TCS have applied it to several such contexts, to finance and insurance, to health and rehab, and so on and so forth. So I'll not read the list. I'll just show you some examples. So well-being. Now, well-being, there are many apps today available for well-being, but there aren't many games. So we were trying to see how can we apply these endogenous design principles to this such context. So when we talk about well-being, one of the prominent things we always know is a guided breathing or mindful breathing, right? So here, if we want to use the element of breathing, which is breathing in, breathing out, and having a certain time for that, meaning this happening in 4 counts or 8 counts or whatever, then what is the analogy in the game? So our design team actually picked a whale as an analogy, and you just watch the whale, breathe in while the whale goes down, breathe out while the whale comes out. So basically, you could really apply this concept to varied context. Then we also created one game recently, not really recently, last year, for a museum in Pune. Now, this museum had a problem. I mean, the problem statement that they gave us is that not many people are visiting us due to COVID. So we have a revenue loss. So how can we actually encourage people to get interested again? So we created this game that can be played on the app, and so if you and there are some incentives. If you play the game well, you get a discounted ticket to the museum and so on. So the game essentially, how is it endogenous basically? So it picks up the elements from the museum itself. The museum has lots of segments, right? So we created a treasure hunt game where people have to actually find out certain combination of elements from different segments of the museum and bring them together to create a story or theme, right? So there are many such mini games within that. So it brings up the element from the content or the context, which is the museum here, and creates a game. And then there is the industry. So when I say industry, industry itself has many functions, right from supply chain management to safety to financial management to knowledge capture to idea generation. And these examples are some of them are actually popular applications that are available on the website. Some of them are something that we did in our game. For example, the idea generation game is something we built here. Knowledge capture game is something we created in our lab, and so on. So we use these endogenous design concepts to varied industrial context as well. So there are innumerous ways in which this can be extended. Well, this is the last section of my presentation, and it's actually where there's a takeaway for everyone that how could you practice endogenous design in your own context or in your own teaching, learning, or the functions that you do in day-to-day work. The first thing that anybody who is trying to create a game-like thing or a game is to understand the user. Okay, so this would look really trivial, but this is the most important thing, and this is what not many people, even designers, do. Okay, they assume that the users are going to be like me or whatever I like, users are going to like. That is not correct actually. So that's the first fallacy we have to look at. We have to know the users well, what they really need, what do they like, in what form they would like it, and when they would like it. This is very essential because we might create some game and expect that students will download it. It's not probably that it may not happen because people may not have interest or time in downloading it. Something that becomes viral, people will download, but otherwise it's very hard for to get people to download something easily, right? So what form is then better for me to reach out to our students if I am a teacher? So there are many forms basically. So you could actually create a hackathon-like setup, or you could give a game design assignment to the student themselves. No, I'm not talking about design students. Okay, your own students, be it engineering students or humanity students, management students, any discipline the student might come from, they can create games. Of course, they will need some introduction or some training on how to create games, a very short training, and then you could give them assignment saying that for your own topic you create a game. Okay, so that itself can be a way to reach out to the users. You need not create a full scale digital game, by the way, that is costly affair anyway. So there are many forms in which these games can be created. There could be some assignments which are given in the class which can be game like, right? So what it means by game like is that people have to collaborate together, and each person will do only one part without telling to the other uh, partner in that particular group about what they are doing. But eventually, it should fit together and so on. So you could create many game-like things inside different contexts. Again, these are three simple steps to do it. We have already got it. Find the interesting elements in any content or any context where we are going to wanting to create a game, translate that into a game element and compose a game. And now what we have added here is that the game may not be in a form, monolithic form, a digital game, downloadable game. It need not be like that. It can be in many forms or a combination of forms, right? So that's what we do. Now, using this approach, we could create a game in variety of contexts. So you could try this yourself. So if I had to do a workshop instead of this 1 hour talk, I could have given this assignment in this workshop. I could have been with you and requested you to create a game that can be played by users at a bus stop. Okay, so people typically wait for a bus at bus stop and they get bored. Now, these problem statements are not coined by me. These problem statements have been posed to us, saying that can you tell us how to create a engaging game at a bus stop? Now, people can obviously go back to their mobile phones and play at a bus stop, right? But what if we create something that becomes alive at a bus stop? Maybe there are some elements at the bus stop that you touch and become part of the digital game. That could be a location, or that could be some arrangement at the bus stop that becomes a part of the game. So that Pokemon Go, which had become very popular sometime back, which was a location-based game. You actually collect Pokemon from various locations, right? So bus stop is a location basically, and you could create a game around that. And then there can be this timetable, railway timetable. I have picked up this example deliberately here, and again I'm going to finish my session in 2 minutes. So railway timetables, some people are railway fans and all. I mean, I'm one of them. So I find railway timetables interesting. But for larger populations, maybe train timetable are the most boring things to look at, right? So what are the interesting elements in that? If at all we are to create an endogenous game from that. So what really we can find is that there are patterns in therein as well. I'll just give a simple example that there are pairs of trains, right? So a train going from, let's say, Pune to Indore, there is a train going from Indore to Pune as well. So there could be patterns about when these pairs of trains cross. Okay, this is a simple example. There are many things within the timetable itself we can find. Okay, but we'll not go into that. So every context has something interesting. It's really the knack of finding it is what we have to hone. Right. This WhatsApp is another example. Can we create a game that can be played on WhatsApp? There aren't many games, by the way. Okay, so don't confuse with the puzzles or quizzes that come on WhatsApp. Okay, those are that is the content that is coming on the WhatsApp. What I'm saying is that can you play a game with different members of the group where you pass certain tokens to somebody and they are hidden, only certain people receive it and so on. Yeah, there is a possibility. I am not going to go into details of that right now. You can find interesting patterns there. You might know that some people respond to WhatsApp quickly, some people don't do that. So that game can really make use of such things, right? So that is what we have to identify in the content. And this approach I told about finding interesting elements into content and creating game. There is another approach which we didn't discuss today, which is you start from known games and then map it into most suitable content. So basically, I'll just take one example here: the Logori game, where you are arranging these tiles on each other and then finishing it. So this really is about what is this game? What is the pattern here? The pattern is about a sequence that you have to arrange those disks in a sequence, right? Now, where is sequence applicable in learning? If you look at the example of electronics engineering again, it is about the transport protocols, right? You have a IP protocol and so on. So they are in a certain layer. So can you create a game using Lagori as a mechanic for that? Yes, it is possible, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is another way of doing it, but this is not the best way to start. The best way is to start with the content. Okay. And somebody who is interested in going deeper into this endogenous design, there is a lot of work available in my own framework that I can share if people are interested. This framework comes with a set of strategy card and a set of cards and a guidance that tells them how to begin and how to go step by step. Yeah, and this is the last thing. So what teachers could typically do is find out don't really need to create full games. You can, I already mentioned, you can find game plots, you can create mini games, give assignments to the students, and so on and so forth. So this is what is a summary of today. So educational game design needs a rethink. Endogenous design looks as a promising way to address the problems with educational games. And there are essentially three steps to creating endogenous design: identify interesting things, translate it into a game element, and compose a game, right? And understanding user is paramount. Last and the important point is that everyone can apply this approach in their own context with some amount of training and interest. Your research lab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the wonderful session. And now I request everyone to please ask their queries if they have, and you can write your question in the question and answer tab. Is there any question from the panel members?
Yeah, I had a question. See, the endogenous game I was talking about, it was based on photosynthesis. And we used some 40 students in that, playing that game.
Right.
And we turned the students into molecules with, role to play, because in photosynthesis, our aim was to show how the light energy is converted to a biochemical energy.
Yeah.
I mean, that as a theme. So each student had, of course, it took us 3 months to train them how to do that and how to behave that. I don't know whether that can be translated into a computer-based.
Yes, yes. No, so very much. I think that's a fantastic example that you give. It's a perfect example of how endogenous design happens, and it can be translated to a digital game. But one of the points I made during the talk was also that we don't need to create digital games for everything. So if there is this model, like the drama model that you had, can be replicated everywhere, so be it. I mean, you don't really need a digital game in the end. So it is about why, like I said, why we want these games is to engage the audiences better with the learning content. But if that is actually through another medium and using game-like elements, so be it. So either way, it can work very well. So
Yeah.
the drama inherently has the same level of engagement. Maybe it doesn't have scalability, but yeah.
Yeah, and also the difference is that it is the time required to kind of bring it out. So that takes a lot of effort to do that. Anyway, maybe I retrieve that video if I have. It was an old one, and then get in touch with you to see
Right.
how it can be
Certainly.
further
Yeah.
input.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you. So actually, since participants do not have questions, I have a question for participants. So basically, how do you think you could use this endogenous design in your own context? So assuming that some of you are teaching, so let me ask the other way around. And before, opening that question to everyone, I would like to thank all the participants for, first of all, joining and listening into the entire talk. And I hope that some of you are at least interested, if not all. So I really thanks for your.
Yeah, it will require a lot of thinking to kind of convert their topics of interest into
Yes,
another way of presentation by gaming techniques or
Hello.
examples which you gave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, I wanted to ask a question. I'm from Medicap University, Snehal Moghe.
Please, ma'am, ask your question.
Sir, actually, I was interested in knowing, can we use augmented reality or virtual reality for answering trigonometry questions in form of gaming?
Yeah. A question was that can we use virtual reality to learn trigonometry, correct? Yes. Yeah, of course it can be used. So there are, like I explained, virtual world or virtual media is just another media. Okay, so it's not. Uh, so whatever we can achieve in 2D, we can achieve more in 3D. There's no two ways about it. But let's say if you want to measure height or you want to use the angles in 3D, and maybe you really want to use the earlier techniques like to measure height of tree in a 3D world, you could really create a replication of such in a VR world. But the point would be that if you just put the quizzes in that in the virtual world as well, then it is not going to be meaningful learning. You have to use the potential of the topic inside the virtual world and create it. So maybe you like I gave some examples. So maybe there is a building and there is a fire on some floor, right? Let's a multi-story building I'm talking about, 20-floor building, and then there's a fire in let's say 7th floor or somewhere. And now from the position you are standing, which is little away from the building, you let's say you have to extinguish that fire, and you have some novel technique to do that. It's not water. Probably you need to just uh, point a laser gun to it so that the fire gets extinguished. Let's assume that for the sake of game. Okay, then how do you really calculate the angle so that it exactly goes on the 7th floor? And if you fire it on some other floor, then actually instead of extinguishing, it might start a fire there. So you have to really be good at calculating angles, understanding the heights and the base of the triangle, and so that you create the right angle, right calculation for the angle. So the point I'm trying to make is the sense of creating engagement is in the plot of the game or the use of elements there. The virtual world itself will not create engagement. It will give us a new affordance. It will give us new possibilities, but by itself it will not be engaging. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, in designing a game, what are the limitations which you have found in designing the game?
So, which I mean, you are talking about video games, digital games, is it, or a general games
In
in general?
general, sir, in designing any game or game theory, what are, as per your opinion, what are the uh, limitations which you have found?
No, so there are so actually it depends on the kind of game somebody is designing as well as the background of the person who is designing. So let's say somebody who is new to games has to design a game. Okay, one of the basic uh, starting points for the new designers is to start from existing games. So what they will typically do is that they look at the existing games and try to mimic it or create a parallel of it, a parallel of that, and which is not a bad start, but ultimately we want audiences to be engaged, right? So that will not happen in such a case. It's a good learning for the designer to start with, but the players will say that, oh, this is similar to that, so I'm not interested. So the real challenge is it's a creative challenge to find something unique, to create a unique gameplay as it is technically called in the game, so that players engage with it. The interesting thing is that, I mean, I'm going a little more into technicality, is that a lot of novelty is also not good. Okay, so if you create a game which is very unfamiliar for the players, again, it's not a good thing. So there has to be a balance between familiarity and novelty. So some of the things from the existing games have to be carried, but some things should be novel. So otherwise, people struggle to play totally novel games. So that's one way. But there are many answers to this, many dimensions on which this answer can be given. But this is one of them.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So that's all from the question and answer session. And after this wonderful session, I would like to invite Dr. Jigasu Dubey, coordinator of Center of Excellence in Simulation and Gaming, for all the words of thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, Rupali ma'am. At the outset, our most sincere thanks to Dr. Sandeep Athavale ji for accepting our invitation to conduct this session in Pratiti Becoming Aware 2023. And the wonderful, it is very wonderful presentation. And I'm very thankful to you, sir. We're also thankful to the ISAGA for their collaboration and support in organizing this webinar series.
We express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Upinder Dhar, Vice Chancellor of the University, and Dr. Santosh Dhar, Rector, for their gratitude and guidance and motivation. We also thankful to Dr. Guru Prasad ji, Dean Sciences, for being with us today. Our sincere thanks to our today's panelists and all other participants who make this webinar successful. I am also thankful to Dr. Upali Bharti and all the members of the COESG and also IT team of the university for their kind support. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the nice words. And now I would like to request all the participants to please fill the feedback form as mentioned in the chat box. And thanks to the speaker, Dr. Sandeep Athavale and Dr. Guru Prasad and Dr. Jigyasu Dubey, sir, and all the participants for being with us today. And we will meet again in the next, in the upcoming series. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Good day, everyone.
Thank you, Sandeep ji.
Thank you, Dr. Athavale.
Thank you so much.